In this section, we will discuss virtual machine snapshots and VApps. Let's start out with virtual machine snapshots. But before we discuss virtual machine snapshots, let's just talk about the concept of a rollback. Let's look at 3 examples of a rollback. An example in a word processor, an example of driver rollback, and an example of system rollback. Now, I think everybody is familiar with the undo button. The undo button is my favorite button in Microsoft Word or in PowerPoint. And the undo button is great because if I have accidentally deleted an entire paragraph, I can use the undo button to undo my mistake. That's what the undo button does. It allows me to undo my mistake and go back to the point in time before the mistake occurred. And then here's another example, driver rollback. In Windows 7 and Device Manager, you can install new device drivers. But suppose you install a new device driver and it just makes things worse and you want to go back to the old device driver. Well, this is what rollback driver does. It allows us to roll back to a previous point in time, and it allows us to roll back to that good driver that worked before we install the bad driver. This is rolling back just one individual driver. Now, system restore allows you to roll back all configuration parameters that have been set since you created a restore point. System restore, which is available in Vista and Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, allows us to roll back all drivers, allows us to roll back all configuration variables to the previous restore point. System restore does not affect the data files. It just rolls back all configuration variables. Now, let's look at VM snapshots. A VM snapshot takes a picture or a copy of the virtual disk of the .vmdk file. So that way, in case you do something that really screws it up, you can then roll it back to an earlier point in time. To create a snapshot, I select a virtual machine and right-click and select Snapshot, and I click on Take Snapshot. And then I will give the snapshot some brief description of what it was that I did, such as install the vCenter server, and I click on OK. And then we see under Active Tasks, it is creating a virtual machine snapshot. To view the snapshot, I go to the data store and I right-click on the data store and select Browse Data Store. And then now you can see for this virtual machine, there is the VMDK file, which is the virtual hard disk file, but down here you see a file with a .vmsn extension, virtual machine snapshot. When we see a .vmsn extension, then we know that that is a snapshot file. Rollback. If you install an update that causes the operating system to become unstable, well, that's why we create snapshots. We can roll back to the point. I mean, assuming that we created a snapshot before we installed the update, and that's what we're supposed to do. To roll back, you right-click on that virtual machine, select Snapshot, and you can revert to the most recent snapshot, or you can go to the Snapshot Manager and roll back to the most recent snapshot, or maybe a snapshot that was taken a week ago or a month ago. Creating a snapshot. You should create a snapshot before you make a major change to the operating system. You should create a snapshot after you do a clean install, before you install a new application, and before you install any updates, because those updates may cause the system to crash, and that's okay. That's why we create snapshots. If we go to the Snapshot Manager, you can see that I have created snapshots. I created a snapshot when I did the clean installation. I did a snapshot when I installed the vCenter server application, and then there's a snapshot for one set of updates and a snapshot for another set of updates. Problem with snapshots is that they can use up disk space. This is why we should delete snapshots when we no longer need them. To do that, I would select on a virtual machine and right-click and select Manage Snapshots. And if I want to delete my most recent snapshot, I can click on Delete. And the good part here is you don't lose all the changes which have been saved. It just consolidates those changes into the previous snapshot. So we save the space, but we do not lose the changes which have been saved. We click on Yes, and that deletes the snapshot, which saves us space on the disk. Virtual machine snapshots allow us to roll the virtual machine back to an earlier point in time. Now let's discuss creating a VApp and removing a virtual machine. A VApp is a group of virtual machines that work together. The perfect example would be a web server, an application server, and a database server. The web server allows the users to connect. The application server allows the users to access the applications, and then the application server accesses the database server. Startup order is important because the applications server is not going to work without the database server running, and the web server is not going to be any good if the application server is not running. If we look at the description of a VApp, we can see that a VApp is a group of virtual machines that can be managed as a single object. So to create a VApp and to add virtual machines and then configure the startup order, we right-click on our ESXi host and select New VApp. And then I will give the VApp some name, such as a customer VApp, and I click on Next. I can configure CPU resources such as shares, reservations, and limits, but we will cover that later on in the class, so I will click on Next. I click on Finish, and now you can see there is my newly created customer VApp. And if I look at it, I can see that it's empty because there are no virtual machines in this VApp. So now I will add my database server, applications, and web server to this VApp by dragging and dropping. I grab the database server and I drop it in the VApp. Grab the application server, drag it, drop it, grab the web server, drag it, and drop it. So now you can see that I have added the 3 virtual machines to the VApp. And then if we look at the VApp settings, we see that we can configure the startup order, and it's currently in the correct order. First database, then application server, then web server. And if I needed to change the startup order, I could use these arrows to move the applications up or down in the startup order. And you can see we have 120 seconds between startup order, and of course you could decrease that number if you like. When we power on a VApp, the point is it powers on the virtual machines in the correct order. If I right-click on this customer VApp and I select Power On, what's going to happen is that it'll first start the database server, then the application server, then the web server. Here's one example: database server, application server, web server. Another example would be DHCP server, DNS server, Active Directory server. Now these are virtual machines that work together, but these are not customer apps, these are infrastructure services, because Active Directory is not going to work without the domain name service server, and the DNS server is not going to work with a dynamic host configuration protocol server. So we set the startup order of DHCP server first, then DNS server, then Active Directory server. VApp is a group of virtual machines that work together, and we can configure the startup order. The last thing to discuss is to remove a virtual machine from inventory, remove versus delete from disk. If I select a virtual machine and I right-click, I can select Remove from Inventory, or I can select Delete from Disk. What's the difference? If I select Remove from Inventory, the virtual machine files are still available, but I will just no longer see it up here. But if I really needed to, I could add it back to inventory later. If I select Delete from Disk, not only will I remove it from my inventory here, but it will delete all of the virtual machine files. Remove removes it from inventory, and Delete deletes it from disk. And this concludes our video. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.